Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the May Shimmerz Paints Color Kitz collection. So when I created this layout, I was on a weekend crop little vacation and there was a sketch challenge. So I decided that I was going to use the sketch to create this layout. And the sketch is by Crafts by Rowena. On the right-hand side of the sketch, there was a large half circle, and then the half circle was divided in half as well. And I knew that I wanted to use some of the pattern papers from the kit, but I wanted to mount them on top of these pieces of green cardstock. I thought that this cardstock went pretty well with the pattern papers in the collection. So I wasn't sure exactly what I was doing. So I cut a large circle, I cut it in half, and then I cut the circle into quarters. And then I used my cutting tool. If you're not familiar with this is a Creative Memories large circle cutter. I use this all the time. And I tried to cut out a piece of paper that was a similar size, just a little bit smaller. And it took me a little bit of fiddling around with the papers in order to achieve this goal, but I was ultimately able to cut that paper out so that it was just a very small amount smaller than the green paper. And then once I had this green paper cut down to size, I picked out this other green paper. This one is a dot. And I used the first shape and I traced around it so I would have an idea of what the second shape should look like, because of course I want it to be the same size. But I still used the circle cutter to make that curve so that it would look the same as the first one. I was afraid of cutting it out by hand. I thought it might look a little wonky. So generally, I like to make a mixed media background. I love using Shimmerz paints for backgrounds. But for this layout, I found there was this beautiful page that looked perfect in the background. It's a floral, but it's very light, even though it's very busy. Because it is a very light color, I felt like it would not be too busy for my background. So I went ahead and inked the edges of the paper. I cut it down just a little bit, maybe 1/4 of an inch on each side. And then I used my ATG adhesive and I attached it down to the piece of paper that I gutted for the circle. I didn't have a matching ink with me, so I was able to borrow these inks. I think they were Martha Stewart inks from my friend Michelle. And this color that was in this stack of different colors of green inks, it matched, I thought, really well with the pattern paper. I didn't think to ink the papers before I attached them down, but when I did think to ink them and I had the ink in hand, I inked the pattern paper and then also the outside paper. Of course, this involved a little bit of very cringy ripping of paper off of other paper. There's just something about that. I don't really like doing it. I don't really like showing it on video, but it all ended up working out just fine, even though I had to rip the papers apart. Nothing important got ripped, and I was able to stack them back on top of each other once I got all the edges inked up. And these inks were great. I did not need a dauber for them. They went onto the edges of the paper very easily. After I reattached the papers, layered them on top of each other, I brought the background back in again. And following the sketch, I wanted to have a large square of photos. Now, the sketch calls for 4 3x3-inch photos. I didn't have that. I had some smaller square photos. I put those 2 photos on the right-hand side of the square. But then the longer photo went on the left, and I wanted to include that almost not quite full length, but that more full length photo of my daughter. I didn't want to cut it. So I decided to just cut a little piece of pattern paper. First, I started off with some cardstock and then I layered some pattern paper on top of it to fill in the area underneath that photo. So once again, I inked the edges and now I'm attaching the piece of cardstock down and I'll attach the little piece of pattern paper right on top of that. These photos are of my daughter Julia, and this wasn't her prom, but it was a prom. She just loved going to buy dresses. She went through such a stage where she bought just so many dresses. Sometimes she borrowed them from friends, sometimes she purchased them, but she definitely went to a lot of dances and wore a lot of different dresses, and I think that was her favorite part of the whole experience. One of the things I love about going to crops is that you get to see what other people are doing, different products they're using, different techniques they're trying. So my friend Sue is a wonderful card maker. She just has such a knack for making cards. She used to scrapbook, but I think that she really found her niche with her card making. Her cards are just gorgeous. So she buys a lot of really awesome dies. So I love to try them out. And these dies were made by Jamie Rodgers Crafts. These are called Ripple Star Blooms. Of course, after I borrowed them from her, I had to order them, and I had to order them from England. Really glad that I did, though, because I think they're super pretty. But I think that you can use the same technique with pretty much any flower dies. And when you add the shimmery paint, I think that they can make any flowers come to life. So I started by cutting out a whole bunch of flowers in different sizes from some 80-pound smooth white cardstock. And then I used two different Shimmerz paints to start out with. I use an Inklingz called Bahama Mama, and then a Shimmerz called Pip Pip Cherry-O. So I mainly use the Bahama Mama, that was from the May kit, but then I also use the Pip Pip Cherry-O, which is the darker pink to the left of my mat, to add a little bit of darkness to the centers of the flowers. You can see that I left the larger ones a little bit lighter, and then the smaller ones are a little bit darker. Once they dry, I'm going to layer them together, but I decided to move on to some smaller flowers. For these flowers, I use a Shimmerz called Orange Sherbet, and I mix that together with some of the pinks that I already had on my little tray. And by the way, that tray is not meant for paint. That's the cover to one of my containers, but I forgot to bring a palette, so that worked out just fine. I was able to rinse it off later on, and I just put it right back on top of my container. It was a great makeshift palette. So you can see that as I'm painting the flowers, I'm making the centers a little bit darker than the outer petals. And I think that that's a way of making them look a little bit more realistic, because the centers of the flowers are always a little bit darker than the outside petals. And then I moved on to the smallest of flowers, which I was going to make yellow, but then in the end I decided that I didn't want them to be a bright yellow. So I started off with some yellow paint, and then I started mixing some other colors on top of the yellow so that the yellow color would be a little bit more subdued. And in the end, you'll see that none of the flowers look yellow, although I do have some yellow elements on my page. They're not going to be the flowers. And as I went along, I added more and more of the orange on top of the yellow. And even though none of the flowers are yellow, you can still see the influence of the yellow in the final product. After I painted all the flowers, I allowed them to dry, and then my friend Sue showed me how she made flowers, so I decided that I was going to use the same technique, and I was really happy with the results. So I started off using some Distress Oxide in Victorian Velvet, and I inked the edges of all of these flowers, and I have to tell you that the shimmery look that they had, I just thought it was really beautiful. I love the shimmer from these paints. So I have 4 different flowers, and I took Sue's sponge and this little tool with the balls on the end of each side, and I pressed each of the centers of the flower into the sponge. And then using my fingers, I kind of curled the petals of the flowers until all of them had just a little bit of curve to them. I'm sure I could have rolled them around something, but this worked just fine too. And then using some glue, I'm just using some gel glue here, I stacked the flowers on top of each other, making sure to offset the petals. And this created what I thought was a very pretty flower. And then I continued, I did the same thing with the other pink flowers, and then I did the medium flowers and the small flowers, so I had a nice little collection of flowers. So now I'm adding one of my favorite embellishments, which is photo corners, and I love to use this EK Success photo corner punch to punch them out. This way I can match the photo corners to the pattern papers that I'm using on my page. And then after I punch them out, I attach them down. I didn't put a photo corner in every corner of every photo. I just put them around the outer 4 corners. And now I'm layering those flowers onto my layout. I thought I would have one cluster on the bottom and then a smaller one on the top, and then a larger one going along the edge of the circle on the right-hand side. And then I use some ATG adhesive to attach the flowers down to the page. Normally when I use flowers by, for example, Prima, this ATG adhesive doesn't work too well, but because the flowers are made out of paper, this worked out just fine. And then I went all the way around the page with my ATG gun and attached all the flowers down. I didn't think I had to show you that whole process. I'm sure you get the idea. And then I wanted to add some branches. So I use this really pretty shimmery paper that, once again, my friend Sue was nice enough to introduce me to. It just has a really nice sheen to it. I thought it went really well with the Shimmerz flowers. And I use another Jamie Rodgers Crafts die called Lavish Foliage, and I purchased this one too, and I cut out a bunch of different branches, and now I'm tucking them into each of the clusters. In most cases, I just tore off some pieces of these branches. I didn't need the whole branch. I just wanted little pieces of them, in some cases larger pieces of them, peeking out from underneath the flowers. And they are kind of large in scale, so I didn't need the whole piece. Now, I'm going to have to ask Sue next time I see her what this paper was called, because I've never purchased anything like it, but I know that it has a particular name that would probably help me to find it pretty quickly. And I was really excited to learn this new technique. I actually have all of the materials that are needed to make these flowers, but I just never knew how to use them. So I'm really excited that I am now knowledgeable about how to make the flowers a little bit more dimensional by using those tools and also by curling the petals. While I was there, I realized I did not bring my regular supply of letters and letter dies. However, I did purchase a big box of all different letters, and I was very lucky that they had some yellowish letters that were just the right size and had all of the letters to spell out the prom. So I think that these are Fancy Pants letters going back a very long time, but I thought that they went perfectly with the colors on the layout. And then I used a spatula to help me move those letters around. Sometimes it could be, I think, a little frustrating to move these. They're not puffy letters, but they're kind of plasticky letters, and sometimes I have trouble picking them up, so that palette knife worked out really well. Yeah, I guess it's not called a spatula. I'm not making pancakes. It's called a palette knife. And I do find that having some metal palette knives have really come in handy. I used to have only the plastic ones, but I did pick up a set of metal ones before Tuesday Morning went out of business quite a few years ago, and I use them regularly. So I added some little stars to either side of the prom. I'm adding one of the dots that's included in the kit to kind of join all of my photos together. And now I'm back home, and I thought that the layout needed a little something more. Sorry about that light shining right on my glass mat. So I used some butterfly punches that I had in my stash. I had 3 different ones that I used. And I punched all of these out of the pattern paper that has the dot that I used on the background of my layout. And then I inked the edges with some Distress Oxide in Bundled Sage. And now I'm going to add some jewels. Actually, these say jewels, but they're actually some self-adhesive pearls. And I'm going to use 2 different colors. Some of them are a little bit more on the peachy side, and some of them are a little bit more on the pink side to go along with those 2 different colors of flowers that I have on my layout. On some of the butterflies, I put a larger pearl on the top and then some smaller pearls underneath. But for most of them, I just used small pearls, and I kind of matched the size of pearl to the size of butterfly. And you can see here that I'm using my scissors to help me position the pearls, because I do not find it easy to work with these little pearls. I don't have the most dainty fingers in the world, so little tiny pearls like this could be a little bit of a challenge. And I didn't include it in the video, but I also tried making some leaves for this layout, but I made them the wrong color, so they didn't go nicely with the color green that I had on the layout. So I decided that I wasn't even going to include any leaves at all. I was just going to include the branches and some butterflies, and I think that it ended up working out. I don't feel like the layout looks like there are any missing leaves. I wanted to add a little antennae, if that's the correct way of saying it, to the butterflies. So I used these little flower stamen that I had in my stash, and I cut little bits of them off and then glued them down on the back of the butterfly. And then I think that adds a nice little detail to each of the butterflies. I had forgotten to mention that in the centers of all of the flowers, I put some jewels. I put some big iridescent dots on the larger flowers and then some smaller ones on the little flowers. The big ones were dots that I bought in Hobby Lobby quite a while ago, and the really tiny ones are iridescent jewels that I often find in the dollar store. And then I place a bunch of the butterflies around the layout. I put a couple on each of the clusters. The bigger the cluster, the more butterflies it got. And then I used a little bit of gel glue to attach them all down to the page. And the butterflies were the very last touch, and the layout is complete. And here are a few close-ups. Please don't forget that if you use my name in the comments when you place your order with Shimmerz Paints, you will receive a free gift with your order. In the description box, you'll find links to the Shimmerz Paints Color Kitz collection for May. You'll also find a link if you're interested in purchasing a subscription to the Color Kitz collection. And you can also check out the Shimmerz shop, where there's lots of great products, including lots of beautiful paints. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you all again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.